happens has a more serious point of view. It's a serious story. It doesn't really have a joke in it, but it does have two different points of view, two different perspectives. And like the Dear Mrs. LaRue book from Letters from Obedience School, one of the stories is in black and white and the other one is in color.
And what's this one called?
This one is called So Far from the Sea.
And it's by
Eve Bunting.
Eve Bunting, very famous author, right?
And illustrated by Chris Sonpe, who was also famous illustrator.
Famous illustrator.
Okay. The color illustrations are a contemporary story. The whole story is actually contemporary, but the illustrations are with the current characters. However, they're visiting the contemporary characters are visiting the grave of the children's grandfather, who was in the Japanese internment camp at Manzanar.
Look at the difference between the illustrations for the past story and then the current story. I mean, real stark difference in
stark
colors.
Contrast.
Yeah.
Right. And the story itself is quite moving. It's very, very difficult to read without, for me at least, without crying. It's very emotional. And
so there's no joke in this book.
There's no joke in this book. But the illustrations very effectively demonstrate two different points of view. And since this is authored by someone who is not also the illustrator, it's kind of interesting. So I kind of wonder. I've wondered whether they were in fact collaborators, whether they talked to each other while they were working on the book, because it seems like it would have been difficult to convey the author's intentions without being able to talk to her.
Yeah, it seems like it's a really well put together story and a true collaboration between the author and the illustrator.
Right. And the pictures of the contemporary setting, Manzanar, that's what Manzanar looks like. It's out in the middle of nowhere at the foot of the Sierras, and it's very, very stark. There is a nice visitor center there, and it's worth a visit sometime. But this is an example of postmodernism being used in a way that isn't a joke.
So it's not always necessarily a lighthearted thing.
Right.
But it can be used to illustrate very serious themes as well.
And it's very effective to have two different points of view when you're illustrating without having to explain that in the text of the story, which would have detracted probably from the story.
Right. So, Ellen, we've talked about postmodernism in general, how postmodernism manifests itself in children's literature and young adult literature. We've talked about different categories of postmodernism, including irony and playfulness, pastiche, self-awareness or self-referentialism, aleatory fiction, and multiple perspectives or voices. And so we really hope that this gives you a good overview of what postmodernism is, how it expresses itself in different genres of children's literature, and hopefully it was helpful to you in understanding the vast array of children's literature and what our kids are currently reading today and where those traditions come from. Do you have anything to...
Well, there's also graphic novels, which fall into the multiple perspectives oftentimes, or aleatory as well, because they're interactive. You have to kind of decide for yourself where the story starts.
Yeah. And so you're going to learn all about graphic novels a couple weeks from now. So absolutely. Awesome. Well, I want to thank you, Ellen, for
thank you for asking me,
for coming and sharing your expertise with us and the students, and really appreciate it. And, all right.
My pleasure.
You're welcome.
All right.